The boundaries which divide life from death are at best shadowy and vague. Who shall say where the one ends and where the other begins? Good evening, Poe fans. Jeanie and I are back. We are the Fantastic Two.
See, we're not in line there.
Yes, we were better than we have been. Normally, we're in the same room, and I think it goes better when we are. So, we have a very special guest this evening, and it is Dr. Sharon Pajka. And so, Sharon, we would love to hear about you and what you do.
Sure. I'm a professor of English at Gallaudet University in Washington, D.C., and we are a small liberal arts college university, and I teach undergrads. So I'm also the coordinator for English majors, minors, and writing minors. So all things English, but because we're small, I get to do some fun courses in the general education program, so general studies. And I teach this semester, I'm doing ghost stories and haunted history. I love folklore. And I'm also teaching media literacy, which I actually really enjoy, but it doesn't sound very sexy. So.
Well, I think it needs to be taught, if you want my opinion about it, because media can encompass a lot more things than most people think about. And knowing how to use them and how to interpret things is
absolutely
it's needed in today's world, in my opinion. So yay.
Absolutely. And the ghost stories, actually, it's always a trick into history because we talk about the fringe history, the things that we don't want to necessarily talk about in polite conversation or in our, K through 12 schools. We get to talk about it with ghosts, and it's sort of a safe way to approach that topic. And also, the art of storytelling. So many young people today don't have, I grew up with the campfire and the spooky ghost stories. And I want to encourage young people to do that too. So sometimes it's their first time telling a ghost story.
Oh, that's very really interesting. Because I actually have a master's degree in reading and storytelling from East Tennessee State University. So not a lot of people know that there are actually, I'm assuming the program's still there because it's under the English program, the liberal arts. So you can get a degree in storytelling, but a lot of people don't know that anymore because they don't use storytelling.
Yeah.
Kids can't even communicate without using text messages. So
exactly.
we won't go into that. But anyway. So great. That sounds exciting. I'm happy to hear that. I would love to take courses.
We also would like to hear more about the book you wrote that, let's see, what date was it coming out?
It's officially? August 21st.
Okay. Yes.
So 2 weeks.
Yes. It's The Souls Close to Edgar Allan Poe, Graves of His Family, Friends, and Foes. And it's with the History Press. It's basically telling Poe's biography, but through other people. And I'm sure I'll talk about too, is that I was, as an English person, I grew up outside of the Richmond area. So I've had a great connection to the Poe Museum in Richmond. I can't remember when I started visiting there, but it was before high school. And, even undergrad, I volunteered and I've had a long relationship with them. So I was really fortunate because Poe was, in my town and people knew of him. But also, I had, parents who were very encouraging. My dad was, he's 85 now, and he was of the generation of science fiction. So he loved all the spooky, weird stuff. And I think that was one of the reasons too, that he really, it was like a gateway. Poe, gets you into the spooky stuff, and then you like reading the wide variety of things he has to offer.
Absolutely. And so with with your book, because Jeannie and I both have read it and loved it, absolutely
Oh,
loved it. And we were
thank
talking
you.
about it a lot this afternoon, before jumping on Zoom, and just the format of how you took the book and everything. Just loved it. One of the things we were curious to know was thinking about just all of the cemeteries, the burying grounds that you visited. Have like you studied and done a lot of research on just like reading gravestones and things like that?
Well, not so much that reading gravestones, and really that I think you could build an entire career just doing that. I
Yes.
am part of the Association for Gravestone Studies, and we actually just set up, a friend of mine and I, we just set up a Virginia chapter. So we're starting that. We're definitely affiliated. And they're very much into the material grave marker. I
Mm-hmm.
kind of like, I've always been like about the story. So even like an epitaph, if it's something that to me feels a little bit poignant. And one of the things that I actually teach is like how to read different grave markers in my ghost stories class. One of the things is cemeteries, and there's different ways to read an epitaph, and we're often very wrong, because what I think might be poignant might be funny to someone else. And we don't always know like the full uh, story behind it. But I do
Mm-hmm.
have a literature professor, but I did go back to school for a graduate program in public history, and
Okay.
they allowed me to do everything that was focused on historic cemeteries,
Oh,
which,
that is fantastic.
yeah, I was really lucky. So, um, yeah.
That's really cool. I have just taken like one course, and it was through Atlas Obscura on reading gravestones,
Oh, yeah.
and I found it fascinating. And just my husband and I like to go wherever we're traveling, going to a cemetery, may not even have a famous person, but just walking around and kind of wondering what are the stories behind these people. So
Mhm.
we just thought that was a kind of an interest. We wanted to find out what, if that played a part in it or not.
A little bit. I will say that, so much of it is also reading the landscape, what
Hmm.
cemeteries, what time period. And when I teach a summer class, some years about cemeteries in Washington, D.C., and we go to different cemeteries. And, some of the students have never been in a cemetery other than maybe a funeral. So I do have to teach them, oh no, you can walk in the grass, because they didn't have these little pathways when this was established. They
Hmm.
want you to walk through, and all
Yeah.
of these concerns about, how do you behave? And I failed as an instructor the first time I taught the course, because I told them everything not to do, and I forgot to tell them what to do. So here I am, like peeping in mausoleum windows, looking for stained glass. And they're like, Dr. Pajka, what are you doing? Are we supposed to be doing that? And I was just thinking, oh my goodness, they really don't know. But I
Hmm.
grew up with a genealogist grandfather. So,
Wow. Yeah.
like as a little, I was like running through the cemetery, trying to find relatives and
Oh, that's neat.
Well,
Very
and back
cool.
in my neck of the woods, literally neck of the woods, because I'm a mountain girl, we would find these tombstones in these graveyards that were just family, but they weren't marked. There's no,
yeah.
there was no guidance. There was just broken tombstones with dates on them and stuff, because, as you said, the older areas, especially in certain rural areas, you don't have a set cemetery.
Right.
It's just basically the backyard or wherever the person died, that they just buried them and may have put up a marker.
Yeah.
So yeah, and my friends and I, we're all history people. Well, all but one. She calls it our trips to the grassy knoll, which we keep telling her it's not a grassy knoll. Because we would love we are like pre, like from American Revolution all the way to the First Great War. So we
Mhm.
visit the Civil War battlefields, especially around here in the South. And the
Yeah.
one thing that we like to do is also visit the adjacent graveyards or tomb,
Mhm.
areas. There was one that we went to in Chattanooga, the big, and it's a national congressional And we were like, oh my goodness, what are all those symbols on the tombstones? We knew that they were religious symbols, that people were buried, the soldiers who were buried, whether male or female, because they were mixed together. And we were like, oh, well, what does that one mean? Because it turned out to be like a scavenger hunt trying to figure out, well, what does that one mean? What affiliation was that one? We even found one that was Episcopalian, no, I'm sorry, not Episcopalian, but Wiccan. There was actually a Wiccan, and there were even Native American symbols on there. And some of them we're going, well, that looks like a what's that thing on the Big Bang Theory at the very beginning? The atom.
Right.
Adam, what religion is that representing? And it was Scientology.
Yeah.
So, or science, not specifically Scientology. But those areas, which leads into one of the things that I was interested in about, do you do rubbings on the gravestones? Do you like to do that too? Or is that just something not?
Well, so I think as official chapter chair for AGS, I'm supposed to say, use that with caution. These are older than your grandparents. So I actually try not to touch grave markers in general, unless I'm, cleaning something off. And I have cleaned them under supervision, because I'm still very anxious about, this is somebody's relative, somebody that was loved. And they're already so abused by nature. I mean, trees are not forgiving, they'll come right down on a grave marker. So, I'm just very cautious about that. I will oftentimes, if it's a flat, marker on the ground, I will move, dirt, and, I'll try to get the name to be, to show. But usually I don't touch them. And I don't think I would rub, partly because, one, as you can kind of see, I already have a lot of artwork in my house. Two, I think that it would just be a big mess, like, to carry it through the cemetery. But I also will do a shout out to Gravestone Girls, because I'm wearing a necklace, and they create rubbings. I'm not sure if you're familiar with them, but artists like, they recreate it, so then you can actually keep it. And I love her stuff, because then I can have it hanging in the house. And I just feel like with the chalk and stuff like that. I mean, I wasn't an art student. I can hardly draw a doodle in my book. I mean, that's
it is one of those things. It can be necessary. Now, I have friends who are artists and who have ventured in that area and use them as part of their greater artwork. Especially when we went to Salem, like the Salem, because it's really old. If you've been there, you've seen them.
But my mom and I accidentally went. This is my ridiculous story. So it was 2000. I was teaching outside of Boston in Framingham, Massachusetts. And my mom came up from Virginia, and I was like, let's go to Salem. That will be fun. Nobody does that on Halloween Day. And we had no idea. I mean, this was pre-social media. So we drove into Salem, and there was chaos then. And I've seen pictures now, which, 20 some years ago, much different. But, we were able to go through the tours, and it snowed. It's on the water. There were flowers. It was like the most magical place ever.
It's beautiful country up there.
It is. It is absolutely gorgeous.
But I will say, like, of art, I do take pictures a great deal. So all the pictures in the book, other than the historic, photos or, portraits, are mine. So that's probably as creative as I get when it comes to artistic. I admire them, but I don't know anything about, what materials to use and whatnot. So
that actually leads into one of the questions that I had put on here about the pictures in the book. Because you shared us the PDF file, which, by the way, thank you. It was
thank you very much for that.
So in the actual production, are they all black and white, or are they actually color?
So
did
what
you
you
just take
what
them
you
off?
have, yeah, for the history press, what you have is actually what you can see in the book. So they are black and white images, except for the front, which really looks quite black and white. They just made it darker, but on the
Yeah.
back, like I took that picture. I'm so jazzed about that.
Nice.
It
This
looks
is the
good.
Poe Museum, the bust at the Poe Museum in
Yes, yes,
Richmond,
yes,
and
yes, yes.
you can almost see like where somebody had kissed him,
Oh,
and
yes.
they have to clean off, the staff has to clean off the statue. They
Mhm.
encourage people not to do that, but
Yeah, they keep doing it.
yes, they keep you can see a little bit of rouge on Poe's cheek, and
Yeah,
yeah.
It
yeah.
definitely has the vibe of the portrait of Dorian Gray when you showed it, and I was like, oh, that's so cool, because it has that ghost-like quality of
Mhm.
he's still immortalized in
Yeah.
that picture,
Yeah.
no matter whether
Yeah.
he's still here or not.
Right.
Jeannie and I were talking about the pictures because they are beautiful, and I really like the aspect of them being black and white because it lends to that old world and just that historical representation. So that just beautiful.
I will
Yeah.
say that so Reverend Converse,
Mm-hmm.
his grave marker, which there's a lot of green, like it's black and
Okay.
white in the book, but there was a lot of green in that photo.
Mm-hmm.
And for whatever reason, that was the hardest, probably because it was the furthest away. So this
Okay.
was in Louisville, Kentucky. So that wasn't like a trip that I could go next weekend and take another picture if it didn't work out. So I think I took maybe 36 pictures over the course of 3 or 4 days that I was staying there, which was all for Cave Hill. Like that was my vacation.
Oh, wow.
And it was totally worth it too. It was what a beautiful cemetery. But the first day I got out of the car and I took a picture of Reverend Converse's grave, and for me, like what was so amazing was that it was much bigger than I thought. So I try to describe them because some of these are like huge and some of them are quite small, but his was so shiny, the granite kept reflecting. And I was one of those people like, this is my vacation, please, overcast, I need to take a picture.
Yes.
And I continually had like reflections, or somebody would park and you could see a car, like almost mirrored in the grave marker.
Okay.
So it was definitely a challenge, but also fun because it was a great deal of, it looks like it's going to rain. Let me run across the cemetery that I think it's almost a mile across, like maybe a little bit under that. It's a huge cemetery.
Oh, wow.
And it was, where I was on one side and he was on the other. And I was like, let me just jet over there and take a picture. Oh, look, the sun came out. Thank you.
Oh, let's get a little brighter here. Somebody apparently is keeping that grave marker really clean.
Yes.
Tiny still.
I think it's just where it's located too, and the material. It looks like some sort of granite. I'm not an expert on identifying all the stones, but it was lovely and completely clear to read, no damage, and probably someone that had a little bit more money, like probably his family members, shipped in at the end of that. So
yeah, they could buy the higher end kinds.
Right. So.
Well, and I was gonna say, kind of like you mentioned the challenge, especially with having that reflective imagery and things. So, like going to the cemeteries, you mentioned that you had to make appointments for some and some that are open. And so, did those kind of challenges, being able to go to those cemeteries, did that kind of push you in one direction or another of who you chose to be in the book?
I do, and I'm actually pulling up. I want to get the cemetery's name right.
Oh, yeah.
But I did, so all of them in the book, anyone can go and access.
Okay.
Greenmount Cemetery out of Baltimore is the only one that, you kind of have to call to get in because they're gated. But
Okay.
if you pull up, they open the gate and, they have maps right there. So they're open to tourism. It's just where they're located. And probably how to get in there with a car. You just have to call a number, or you can get out of your car and push a button and it rings for the office staff because their office is right there.
Okay.
But I was thinking about one cemetery in Baltimore, and I want to say let me just browse because I'm pretty good at spotting who I need to look at. And I mentioned that he's not in the book. So if you looked at the very end, Elizabeth Rebecca Herring Tut Smith, so 178, if I go to her, I do mention that her parents, in the very end section, I have like grave reflections, and I said that her parents are buried in Old St. Paul's. That's what I was looking for. Cemetery. And, Francis Scott Key was buried there originally, was reinterred, so not there now. But it was a cute little cemetery, and I've only been able to peep in outside of the gates.
Okay. Oh, wow.
There's a chain link fence, as well as, a historic gate that would have kept me out anyway. But I called several times, and like as a professor and a researcher, I usually do have pretty good access into places. And it wasn't that they were saying no, it was just, and it also, this is out of, a world, pandemic, and people are much more cautious about in person. But I had a hard time. And after a month, I was like, even if I get to go in to see this grave, I won't actually be able to recommend this for people because it would be such a challenge.
Yes, that makes sense.
But I will say that the marker is very close to the gate. So if you're like me, like you can peep in and take pictures and whatnot. But it was important only because this was someone who was Poe's uncle, and he shows up throughout the book, so I don't think I excluded anyone altogether, like to help me tell the story, because as you've read it, I go through sort of a loose chronological order of the different people who were in Poe's life, and some people were there like cousins and family from the beginning, so I just try to put them in at a significant time. But I didn't miss anyone in the area that I was covering, because the History Press does have a word count restriction, and my first dream was the entire East Coast, which
that would probably be over the limit there.
I think it was one of the notes that I have is there were 240 some correspondence with Poe, just the nature of his job was he was writing people. So I got to read the letters, which were really amazing.
That would be.
Yeah. I mean, and so I had read the poetry and the stories, but it never really stopped to read the literary criticism, which is weird because literature professor, you would think, but so on this journey, I was able to read the letters, like, to and from Poe, the ones that were available, as well as, the criticism. And I just learned so much. Like, I had no idea how much I didn't know starting this.
Well, I was telling Jeanie that, reading, there were some people that, a lot of them, the usual suspects that with Poe, but there were a few other outside people that it's like, oh, I didn't know this. So I'm like, this was I enjoyed it. It's so much like entertainment value for me, but because I love Poe, I love cemeteries, but I was like, this is, historical and a learning experience too. And I love to learn. So it was awesome.
Yes, for me too. For me too. One of them was, Dr. Carter, who was a friend of Poe's. And when you think of, Dr. Carter, you always think of like someone that's older, but he was a kid compared, he's like half Poe's age at the time that they met.
Yeah.
So I didn't quite understand like the age of this, and there's no fault, of anyone. I've gone to museums don't have the time to sit there and put everybody's age in and how they know each other. And but there were really fun, like the letters were so much fun because you got to see the the language of people who weren't necessarily, some of them were poets and didn't realize it. And some of them, were published poets, but their letters were just so beautiful and poignant. And
yeah. And just, and the handwriting would be amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and the language in that time period was definitely centered still on the British influence, because they were, in kind of like crossing it to the new dialect and the new interpretations, but they were still getting that influence from the Latin base of the French, the Spanish, the Dutch, the English, the German, you got the Italians, you had all of Europe pretty much in the area that was influencing the language, but it was also influencing the educations. Is in those areas, only those that were well off and male were getting the main education. So the younger doctors and all those, you weren't really, today it's like you're really that young to be a doctor? What the back then it's like, they didn't have to go through 7 years of residency or go to the ER and hang out or anything like that. But I wanted to also bring in that I loved how you formatted each one of them, because if you took out just each one of the people that you visited, it could be a story on its own.
Yes.
And especially I loved how you used the quotes.
Yes, we love that.
We use quotes at the beginning and the end of our podcast. So we were like, oh yeah. So one of the things I wanted to know is, how did you choose the specific quotes for each one of the people that you talked about? Was it just something that just came to you, or as you were researching it, it was like, oh, this would fit perfectly? So what was your reasoning behind that, is what I'm asking.
Probably the same way you do a podcast, like what speaks to you. So obviously for me, the journey was not, I start at the people in the beginning of the book and then I go through, it was all over the place and I had no idea who was going to be in what order, some made sense. They would be near the beginning, but I really wanted to meet each person separately. Like I wanted to tell the story of Poe, but I also really wanted to know who these people were. And I'm always like, especially the women, like I'm always just curious about what were they like. But I really was so overwhelmed with some of the newspaper men and some of the writers that I had never even heard of. So that was exciting. But some of them just, when I was like researching and writing, I think everyone had like a little bit that was like, oh, that needs to go. Like, I need to include that. That just makes sense. Some there were more than one. So and then my husband is my first reader. He's MFA creative writing. So
nice.
Oh, that is nice.
Yeah, I just read I read his draft today. He's a fiction writer, so I think I bored him a little bit. But he does tell me how to, make things a little bit more enjoyable, so I don't read like, here, like, let me drone on about about history that I love, but you might not care. So
well, it was like I was telling Carmen that when I was reading it, I could see it very much from an academic nonfiction standpoint.
Yes.
It very much called to me in that area. But on the same instance, like I was saying, each one of them were telling a story. So that called to the storytelling parts of me.
Yeah.
But it was so funny. Carmen actually had to point out one thing to me. I don't know why I missed it or what about it, but Miss Valentine there, her birthday was February the 14th of 1884, right? No, 1780.
No. Yeah.
1784. I'm like, no, let's go back. That's my birthday. My birthday is February 14th also. So I guess when I was reading it and I saw the last name of Valentine, I just glossed right over the dates. And
and I was like, her last name, her maiden name was Valentine, and she was born on Valentine's, which is just so coincidental, ironic, whatever you want to call it. Yeah. And so I said something to Jeannie. She goes, I did not catch that, and I should have, being born on the same day.
It was just one of those things. I was like, Oh, I just missed it.
So Frances Valentine Allen was a big deal for me. So this is Poe's foster mother, who really, she did not birth any children her own. She really did love Poe as her son. But she was such a big deal for me. Like, I've been doing tours at Shockoe Hill Cemetery. She's buried there. The Allens are buried there. I always make bad jokes about Baltimore, which has taught me a lesson a few times. But I always say, Shockoe Hill Cemetery is, where Poe would have been if he didn't go to Baltimore. And then last year, January, I went to Baltimore and I fell on the cobblestone and broke my finger. And I was like, I left like a blood sacrifice in Baltimore. So this past time we were friends. Like, I love Baltimore. And in fact, I think the folks in Baltimore might love Poe more than Richmonders. And those are some fighting words, but they really do. Like, you can go anywhere in the city and there's restaurants and everything's so thematic, and I love thematic. So for me, I'm just like, nothing but love for Baltimore. So I need to stop telling my bad joke. But I will say with Frances Allen, and this is a podcast, but I did put on some orris root because that's what.
Yes.
I saw that you mentioned that in the book, that you made sure to have that on when you were visiting her grave, so you could sit there and get the same feeling as when Poe would bring those flowers to her, or the perfume. I'm sorry.
Yeah. He remembered her having that in her room, like if she'd open her bureau drawers, he could smell that. And one, I didn't know orris root was so expensive, so I really had to. I was like, whoa, why is this such a difficult product to find? But I use a lot of the natural botanicals, so you can find it. And I tried a couple, and they do smell similar. So I guess that's what orris root actually smells like.
Okay.
So hopefully I'm getting a similar smell. But there are moments like that where I really just try to connect with the person too. I wanted to, reading their letters, I just kind of think about, what would it be like if someone just picked up my letters or my diary and read all this information about me? That's what I did to these people. So I wanted to be very respectful. I was always very much like, thank you. I'm not a paranormal, supernatural person at all, but I am very gracious when I'm in a cemetery, because you never know. And I was raised right. So
I was gonna say, my father passed when I was pretty young, and my mother regularly put flowers on my dad's grave, and I always went with her. And she always would turn the music down in the car. We would drive very slow through there. We'd stand at the grave and just kind of silence for 5 minutes or so, and then we'd kind of just say, okay, we're going to leave now. And it was just I will never forget those moments. And it's like, this is so bittersweet, because I miss my father, but at the same time, I enjoyed going to the cemetery to, kind of just pay that respect. So, because kind of like you said, raised right and treating cemeteries.
And I mean, with that too, we usually don't have very many connections to cemeteries unless it is a funeral or visiting a loved one.
Yeah.
And so my husband and I, so I'll just keep it creepy, but we have our plot. That was one of our, I think the first year's paper. And it was his idea. He's so not cemetery creepy or anything, but it was his idea. And I, of course, was like, oh, this is so amazing. So we got to ride around on this little, golf cart with the manager of the cemetery and pick our spot.
Oh, wow.
Which to me was like super amazing. And we found a spot that, I probably shouldn't tell this part, but it was discounted because it's like on a hill with a bunch of trees. It would be a horrible place for a funeral, is what they said. But we're both introverts, and we sort of like the idea of being in a really popular place, but also quietly tucked under this beautiful magnolia behind a mausoleum. And I was doing that Scooby-Doo sort of tiptoe trying to get to the spot.
Yes.
But we do go, and annually Hollywood Cemetery has an annual picnic, And we, my husband goes for the free ice cream and the hot dogs, and and then I just make him like walk around the cemetery, but we visit our plot together. So the idea is for us to also have some sort of tangible connection to, I remember when I, toured him around the cemetery that first time, and I remember when we picnicked here together. This is where we're our forever home. So we're trying to make memories there too, which is probably just because I'm a cemetery historian. I don't think that's normal. So.
Thank you for listening to Grave Walking with Poe, Part 1. Stay tuned for Part 2.